Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O. Movie Reviews podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. I'm your host, Bennett, Campbell, Ferguson. I'm here today with my colleague, Jim Newman. We're going to talk about some of our favorite films of 2018. But first, I want to tell a little story that I think will be familiar to Jim.
I'm all ears. I'm interested in this.
For those of you who don't know, I work over at Cinema 21 part-time, and a couple months ago, I was cleaning up the theater after a screening of Boy Erased, and I hear this iconic, instantly recognizable voice ringing out in the darkness, and I was like, is that... It couldn't be.
No.
It is. It's Jim.
Certainly not in real life. A celebrity. Yeah, Boy Erased.
Yeah, you really liked that movie, right?
I did, and what's interesting, because we're talking about favorite movies, I was just running over my favorite movies in my mind, thinking about coming over here today, and I realized that lots of films go through my head and disappear into the vapor, and they somehow don't register. And I'm sorry to say that I didn't even think about Boy Erased when I was coming over here to talk about favorite movies, even though I know I did tell you.
Right.
And I meant it. That in many ways is an exceptional film. Why didn't it stick?
I think that's something we should get into later, because we're towards the end of the conversation. We're going to talk about, why we respond to certain films, why we, pick one as our favorite and not the other, because it's a fascinating side of film criticism where kind of, sort of supposedly objective analysis and kind of the way things personally affect us intersect. Jim's going to talk about his favorite film of the year. I am hosting the second part of this podcast as well, so I'm going to talk about my second favorite film of the year. So I have something to cover later on. But let's dive in. Jim, what was your favorite movie of 2018?
Well, it comes down to two. One is the period drama, which actually, in terms of the trailer, looks like a comedy because there's so much slapstick in the trailer. Emma Stone falls into the mud a couple of times, but that's called The Favorite. It's a period drama from about the early 1700s during the reign of Queen Anne. And it is richly conceived. The art direction is truly spectacular, and acting is monumental in that film.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that movie, but the other one is set more or less in modern times. It also focuses on a powerful woman, as does The Favorite, and that is Can You Ever Forgive Me, with Melissa McCarthy and a guy named John E. Grant. Those are the two
Or Richard
stars.
E. Grant?
Richard
Great
E.
actor. It's a real pleasure to see someone like that finally get an Oscar nomination after decades of great performances.
And Melissa McCarthy is up for Best Supporting Actress.
Lead actress.
Oh, is it lead?
Yeah, Richard E. Grant supported that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a toss-up between those two films for me, which one might be slightly given the edge because of my emotional makeup, maybe. But because I was in awe of Melissa McCarthy in the movie. She plays a woman named Lee Israel, who actually did exist. In fact, wrote a memoir called Can You Ever Forgive Me about her experience, and that was what was made into the movie. Melissa McCarthy does not use her normal comic persona at all. She plays a difficult, very neurotic woman who's supremely unhappy with her life, and so she dabbles in fraud in order to make a living because she can't find an agent that is able to sell the kinds of biographies that she writes. And so she's essentially starving in New York City, and then she resorts to forging personal letters by people like Fanny Brice and Noel Coward. And it happens that Lee Israel is such an imaginative human being that the writing that she does in these notes that she then takes to collectors, people who sell documents with famous people's signatures on them, she finds a ready market for this work that she creates and then sells as though it was actually written by a celebrity. And she gets herself into a tremendous difficulty. But to watch this woman's degradation and to watch Richard E. Grant, who becomes her partner in crime, it's a magnificent character portrait of two people who are in an advanced state of dissolution. These are two human beings who are rapidly reaching the bottom. And what's strange about it, I expected the movie to be depressing to me. And I'm not sure why it wasn't. It might indeed be just the magnificence of their performances.
Well, it reminds me of I haven't seen Can You Ever Forgive Me yet, but I did see the director Mario Heller's previous film, which was The Diary of a Teenage Girl. And that's, on the surface, a very dark film, because, the main character is a teen girl who, ends up basically being raped by her mother's much older boyfriend, and yet somehow, like in this really grim story, the film, ultimately comes to this sort of empowering, life-affirming conclusion. It seems as a storyteller, and maybe you felt this, you can tell me, and Can You Ever Forgive Me, she has a way of kind of finding hope and sort of bleak, challenging scenarios.
Well, if you look at it through that lens, I think she was fortunate in discovering these two lead actors, or maybe she brought it out in them. Certainly it's obvious that Richard E. Grant and Melissa McCarthy are really talented people, but in their degraded state, they're drunk most of the time, and they don't really like each other. They condescend to each other. Mm-hmm. They each see in the other their worst character flaws. And so they react with disdain, almost line for line, when the other person talks. But the magic of seeing that in a performance where the truth is they're in front of a camera on a set,
yes,
and they're in some masterful way recreating real life and recreating moments in real life that are evanescent. I mean, they dissipate like the fog. They're gone in no time. Just those moments where someone is drawn to, because the conversation is going bad in some way, drawn to insult the other person in no uncertain terms, and then the other person comes back and attacks them because there's just this fundamental resentment of people that are on the bottom. I mean, they're in New York City with no money. The Richard Grant character doesn't even have a place to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. And it's cold because it's the winter. And the Lee Israel, Melissa McCarthy character is living essentially in a garbage house. They are both messed up human beings. And Yet the vibrancy of the performances is something that stuck with me, whereas the flawless performances in Boy Erased, it was almost like they were so smoothly rendered that they left me impressed but not awed.
Sure.
In a way.
Sure. I was thinking when we reviewed A Star Is Born a couple of months back, and I think we talked about Lady Gaga's performance in that film, and it's an impressive performance in a certain light. But I did get to thinking, I have to admit afterwards, like, I don't know if she really creates a character,
I think that's, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yes.
Yeah, because, there's and maybe this is what you're speaking to with Boy Erased as well, there's a difference between charismatic and real and convincing and actually creating a character, and that's one thing that Melissa McCarthy and Richard Grant are always able to do in everything I've seen them in. There's always these rough edges, these weird flourishes, these eccentricities,
And maybe the secret, I don't really know this because I know nothing about Richard Grant, and I know really nothing except her performances I know her success, Melissa McCarthy, but plumbing something true, finding maybe something deep in one's own character, and then having the courage and just the raw talent to bring it to the surface and actually wed that character flaw, if such it is, to the words given to you to recite in the script.
Sure.
That is some magical kind of chemistry that often doesn't happen, and it can still be a good film without it. But I'm thinking about one scene in Can You Ever Forgive Me, where finally Lee Israel has been brought down. The FBI got involved. They had photographs of her going into shops. Beware of this woman, because she's selling forged documents that putatively came from celebrities like Fred Allen or Fanny Brice or whoever. And so she's in court. The judge says, do you have anything to say before I pass judgment on you? So Melissa McCarthy gets up and she says, honestly, Judge, looking at my life, I know why I did all this, and tell you the truth, I'd do it again. And her attorney, who has been trying, because out of pure sympathy for this down and out woman, the look on his face. But then Melissa McCarthy keeps talking, and she starts sort of spontaneously reliving what she has done and why she did it. And as I was in awe of this, because as I watched, I saw this Lee Israel character really beginning to see, as she had never seen before, exactly what it cost her to do what she had done. And as this monologue ends, her conclusion is far different from that insouciant, who cares kind of, I'd do it again. It's not that at all. And it is such a magnificent performance that it makes me think there's just no question. I doubt that she'll get the Academy Award.
Yeah.
But it is one of the most, and I'm going to use a word that people don't use very often in English, maybe they write it, sublime.
I like it.
It was a sublime performance to see the kind of regret, the bottomless existential regret on this woman's face as she realized what she did and, in consequence, what she has become as an old woman.
We have to move on in a moment, but I do want to ask you about The Favorite, because needless to say, there's a lot to unpack with that movie, as there is with any film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. But I saw the film a couple months ago, and I was really intrigued by, there's a sort of, I think, divided spirit in it. I think most of the film is, I guess, maybe savage comedy is the right way to put it, and it's observing all these royal power games.
That's for sure.
And really taking delight in them and turning them into entertainment, kind of disturbing at times, gory entertainment, but entertainment nonetheless. And then something happens near the end. The ending is very kind of odd and poetic and somber. And after most of the film, which makes the three leading actresses, look like they're in control and they're really kind of manipulating the destinies of everyone around them, the ending really kind of positions them more as they're victims of the quote-unquote system, society, whatever you want to call it. And it's the ending in a way I feel like almost feels like we enter a different movie at the end. And I just wondered like what you make of where the film ends up versus where it starts out, because I do think there's a really interesting journey that goes on.
One reason that movie intrigued me so much is its pure perversity. And I think
another good word.
It is such a perverse movie.
That word was practically invented for movies like this.
It was. I think the director is, what's his name again?
Yorgos Lanthimos, yeah. Who also made Dogtooth and the Lobster and the Killing of a Sacred Deer.
I don't know. I'm not sure I still know how to pronounce that guy's name. He's Hungarian, is that right?
He's Greek, yeah.
Oh, he's Greek, okay.
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong myself.
All right, well, I mean, he's one courageous hombre, in my opinion. It's beautifully art directed. Virtually every set is opulent. I mean, the palace is actually a cage in some ways for these poor women.
And they're really kind of like ugly cage in a good way.
Yeah.
Like it's not beautiful. Like everything looks kind of grimy and claustrophobic and like you said, I mean, like a cage. It's a prison in a sense.
I watched the movie twice. I saw it the second time with a photographer friend of mine, and what the director chose to do in this movie was to use lenses that distort the image.
Yeah.
He used fisheye lensing, vast panoramic lenses to show something relatively close, so that it looks in some way like you could say he ruined the shot. And
I feel like that's part of the comedy in a way, because it's, for some reason, those fisheye lenses to me, they heighten the absurdity. And this is gonna sound kind of vague, but I feel like they add to sort of the deadpan humor of it all. I mean, I know Lanthimos doesn't like the word deadpan. He talked about that.
Oh, he did, huh?
Yeah, but I just can't think of any other word to describe his sense of humor. I mean, I think he's the definition of deadpan. Deadpan perversity, maybe.
And that is why I use the word perverse. I asked my friend Nick, the photographer, if he thought that maybe they shot the film normally. That is, they used the lenses that are typical And then, while processing it, they used optics to distort the images. And he said that he thought not. He thought the director probably knew what he was doing from the get-go and had the courage to use a fisheye lens, even though that meant that what you see is what you get, and you got a distorted image.
Right.
He said and I guess if a person is at that level, if a person has proved oneself so powerfully that they're given this multi-million-dollar production to helm and get into theaters, then you trust him and he trusts himself. But as you say, there's a distortion field in that castle that's destroying these women. And meanwhile, around them is nominally the height of luxury that could be provided to a human being in the early 1700s. But it is choking them to death. It's claustrophobic. And I think that's partly what those lenses say, and that's part of the beautiful irony of it. And I didn't find the ending out of sync with that.
Okay, gotcha.
Because what ends up happening is Emma Stone, in some sense, is victorious. She has won the favor of the Queen, and so she will always now be at the Queen's side, which is what she wanted, which the Rachel Weisz character had that position before, but Emma Stone wins and kicks her out, and now it's the Queen.
But the film questions like whether, the prize is as satisfying as the struggle.
Exactly, because it turns out that poor, distorted Queen Anne, her personality has been dwarfed into some kind of monstrous, I don't know, really unhappy, toxic person. And Emma Stone will find no pleasure serving that monstrous human being. And the last scene is Emma Stone mindlessly massaging the very ill, both mentally and physically, Queen's leg. And her eyes just go blank. And then it dissolves into this field of rabbits. And rabbits, by the way, are the only things that Queen Anne can allow herself to love. So it's a mess. And you don't want to be a part of that.
No.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on, I just want to talk about one particular scene because I love it so much, and it's my favorite scene in the film. Emma Stone's wedding night. She's her now husband wants to consummate the marriage.
Well, of course.
And but she is so obsessed with this power game, with Rachel Weisz, trying to win the Queen's favor, and she gives this amazing monologue about kind of like what she's going to do, her plans, etc. While she's giving her husband a hand job without looking at him, and just it's a brilliant encapsulation of what I think the film is also about, which is that it's about characters for whom power is the ultimate romantic thing, even more romantic than romance itself, and that's kind of an amazing subject for a film that, despite being an indie of sorts, is aimed at a pretty large audience, and I think I think that explains a lot of why it's so entertaining and why people are interested in it, because we don't see that on screen that often.
Well, as I say, I had a choice of various movies I could have seen, and I chose to see that one twice.
Nice.
Because it totally absorbed my attention into this world, and there are so many things to look at and to feel some sort of emotional response to, that director is always giving you something that registers in the heart, it feels like.
Yeah.
Through that whole movie.
And he's making you squirm too. I mean, he it's a film that affects you physically.
Yeah, but we gotta give a shout out to Olivia Colman, who plays Queen Anne.
Yes, yeah.
That is one of the best performances I've ever seen. She almost doesn't say, well, for much of the film, she's moaning or complaining in very simple language.
That'll happen when you have gout.
The woman is in pain, and she's a broken, mentally damaged human being. Just a broken personality, but she's still hungry. And to be able to understand that character and evoke it so beautifully on camera was what art is all about to me.
I agree 100%. All right, I'm going to talk about my second favorite film of the year now, which is, drumroll, Damien Chazelle's First Man. I am
really?
Yes, yeah. I became a fan of Chazelle not actually when Whiplash came out, because while I like a lot of things about Whiplash, I have some misgivings about it. I think it's very much a young man's film, and as much as it has interesting things to say about creativity and art and obsessiveness, I think a lot of it is has that quality of what a lot of younger male filmmakers do, which is they're really trying to get a reaction, really trying to shock an audience. And as much as I think that has value, I think part of any filmmaker's journey is growing beyond that a bit and growing a little older, growing a little wiser. I saw him do that in a big way with La La Land, which was my favorite film of that year, 2016. And what that movie showed is that he's a filmmaker who's not afraid of big emotions, not afraid to be sentimental, not afraid to wear his heart on his sleeve, in the best sense of the phrase, I think. And I think he really continues that with First Man, which, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is his cinematic biography of Neil Armstrong and his chronicle of the first moon landing. And I think the key thing to understand about First Man is that it is not, nor I think is it intended to be, the definitive Neil Armstrong / Apollo 11 movie. It's really one man's interpretation of who Armstrong was and how those events unfolded. And I think of the film as not the ultimate account of who Neil Armstrong is, but one person's thesis about this is maybe who he is and why he did the things that he did. And so the key thing to that decision is the film starts with his daughter, Karen, dying as a little girl. And what First Man suggests is that Neil Armstrong was heavily motivated by that he joined NASA partly to get beyond the grief he was feeling, and also to prove, I think, to himself and to his family, to the people around him, that he was still a man, that he wasn't going to succumb to grief, that he could still be tough and stoic and daring and could kind of slot into this conventional sort of idea of what masculinity is. But the film does this really kind of incredible thing, and it shows that the further he goes, the more he challenges himself, actually that forces him to be even more vulnerable than he was before. And you see that particularly at the climax of the film, when he has to admit to his wife, Janet, played by Claire Foy, and to his sons that he might not make it back. And we see this incredible scene with, one of the boys saying, "You think you're coming back?" And he's like, "Well, we have real confidence in the mission, but you don't know, do you, Dad?" And he's like, "No, I might not come back." And the idea of having to say that to a child and having to be honest, which is really kind of being emotionally honest, is what he resists throughout the film. And the movie, I think, is largely about the idea of going beyond what you know, going into the unknown. In fact, a big part of that is seeing the things and the people we already know in different ways. And that really comes to fruition on the scenes on the moon, where Chazelle and his editor, Tom Cross, they do this incredible thing where they cut between images of Armstrong and the moon and images of him with his family back home, and almost as if these memories, these painful but beautiful memories, are filling up the empty lunar surface. And then the movie takes it a step further by showing at the end Armstrong in quarantine, separated from Janet by a glass wall, and the two of them looking at each other, trying to communicate all these unspoken feelings and regrets, or at least that's how I interpret it. And it's kind of a reference, I think, to the fact that they, after the moon landing, quite a while after, they got divorced. And so it's kind of fitting to end, with a literal and symbolic barrier between them. And yet it is this moment of connection. And I think, as I wrote in my review in the film, that's what this movie is about, the idea of the real giant leap is not often one giant leap for mankind, but the closing of the distance between two people. And I think it's a really beautiful film that shows that. I feel the need to add, it's not a perfect movie, and I think one thing that any future Apollo 11 movies should consider, and I hope there will be more films made about the first moon landing, because I think it's a vast and fascinating subject. I think that you could make an even better film by not telling the story through just one guy's eyes. I think you could make an even richer film that was that kind of gave equal weight to the perspectives of Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, because this was not just one man's mission. It wasn't just one man's story. It was a massive effort, and I think First Man, nods to that, but without fully expressing that. But I still think that the greatness of Ryan Gosling's, very quiet, but nonetheless extraordinarily impactful and intense performance, along with Chazelle's absolutely beautiful filmmaking, and the way he creates these scenes of space flight and immerses you in all these incredible details, like the dwindling fuel as they descend to the moon. I think the movie's strengths carry the day, and I think it's a powerful and entertaining and moving piece of work, and that's why I have it in second place.
Well, it's like Boy Erased. I'm embarrassed to say that's one of them that when I left the theater, it was totally thumbs up.
Yeah.
But it didn't stick with me as it obviously did with you. And could you identify what the ultimate hook was? Was it the emotional conflict with his wife, or was it something more internal than that had to do with his attempt to somehow overcome death, or at least the fear of death? Or, is there a way to summarize?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's I think that gets to the core of the whole enterprise, both NASA and the film, needless to say. I think this is a movie with a lot of quiet, a lot of awkward silences. It's a movie that I think, is leaving us to kind of fish around and try and make sense of it. It's not, like Chazelle's last two movies, a movie that's very clean and clear and is, expressing what it wants to express very succinctly. I think one answer is, the opening scene is Neil Armstrong in the X-15 flying above the Earth's atmosphere. And I think, part of, at least in the film's theory of who he is, why he does what he does is because, he truly is fascinated by the idea of flying into the unknown, of having these great, larger-than-life experiences. There's another scene where one of the other astronauts says, all I can think about is getting back up there. And the idea, and he doesn't even say why. He doesn't even seem to know why, but the idea that these missions hold almost this mystical power. They're terrifying. They're even, painful at times. These guys are rattling around in what are essentially giant tin cans, but they have this allure. But then also, I think, I think it's partly a macho thing as well. If you're trying to, frame yourself as, the perfect husband, the perfect father, the ultimate provider and protector, what better way than to do the craziest, the riskiest thing any person could do? And this was a guy who was, he was a veteran. He was a former test pilot. I think being daring was kind of in his genes and in his whole history. And it's really interesting. I've started reading the book that the film is based on, and you learn all kinds of crazy details, like about the jobs he worked as a kid. He worked at a bakery, and he was, part of the reason he had the job was because he was, small enough to crawl inside the mixers and clean them out. Yeah. So he was really, I think, an explorer from childhood.
From his childhood.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. I remember when I saw you at Cinema 21, and what affected me most about Boy Erased was the amazing performance by Russell Crowe, who's well past his leading man days.
Yes,
and is quite a portly individual, but in some way it almost has made him a better actor because his face is so expressive. And the personal tragedy for him as a religious man to find that his son is gay, registered as confusion and horror mixed with love on his face. I thought that was really an amazing performance, but for whatever reason it just didn't make me remember that I even saw it until you brought it up.
and when you say tragedy, I assume you mean from his
from his ultra religious. Well, the whole movie is really gay positive, I think. I think it is an excellent piece of evidence for why it's so utterly false and a waste of time to try to judge or to change somebody's sexuality, because that can't happen. And that movie really shows that beautifully, but it also, to me, gave due credit to the people who are brought up in this religious milieu who cannot see that at all.
Unable to see past it.
No, and that
doctrine that's,
and that increased the, I thought the emotional tension of that movie was based on the truly felt horror when they found out their son was a homosexual. That's the pivotal point of the scene, or the film, but then it very nicely lays out ultimately the emptiness of worrying about stuff like someone's sexuality, really.
Sure. We should, I want to move on to the final question of this round. I've really been fascinated for over a year, I'd say, with the idea of picking favorite films. And how do you decide what your favorite, or in case your two favorites of the year are? I mean, because I think a lot of people would say, oh, you just think what was the film or films that you enjoyed the most, but then a lot of us, those of us who see a lot of movies might say, well, we enjoy a lot of films, we might be taking into consideration, is weightiness, gravitas, emotional impact. Is it communicating something that's provocative and gives you something to chew over? I mean, there's no wrong answer. There's no wrong way to look at it. It's all an intensely subjective thing. So I just wanted to ask you, and I'll talk about this as well. And for instance, like when you were looking at the movies you saw and you decided, Can You Ever Forgive Me and The Favorite are my favorites.
Yeah.
I mean, what did? Is it something that you decided, like, does the decision come on a gut level? Are there criteria you think about? I mean,
I don't think it's intellectual at all. It's total gut. And I can kind of prove that with one little example.
But before that, it's interesting you said it, because film is very much a medium. It's about reaching us on a gut level.
Oh,
I mean, that's
absolutely.
kind of baked into its DNA.
Melissa McCarthy in the courtroom. That is a gut-wrenching scene where she goes in something like 8 minutes through this journey of self-discovery, and what she finds out about herself isn't positive. And yet she has to deal with, I mean, for an actor to be able to take the viewer on that journey, it just fills me with some kind of, my jaw goes slack to know about that. But
sure.
In Bohemian Rhapsody, you know what my big takeaway from that movie was?
What?
Michael Myers' performance.
Oh, yeah.
As the record producer who is the gatekeeper who has to decide.
It goes on for 6 bloody minutes.
Well, Mike Myers is a comedian I don't admire very much. I mean, I think he's very broad. But that was the most beautiful acting performance. And when I left the theater with my friend, I said, didn't Mike Myers do a great job? And he said, he wasn't in the movie.
The ultimate compliment.
I think
to an
so.
actor, I think.
And I've said it to other people, too. That sticks in my mind as powerfully as Melissa McCarthy, as powerfully as Olivia Colman, because Mike Myers obviously transcended himself and his desire to be a clown.
Sure.
He did a magnificent job of portraying a put-upon, maybe brilliant, but whiny man who has immense power over these young musicians.
Well, let me ask you this. Like, I mean, you talked about that performance. You talked about, that courtroom scene. I mean, as much as, who's behind the camera matters, we do often experience films, through the eyes of the actors. Because
yes.
Whatever emotions or ideas are at play, the actors are, entrusted with bringing those to the audience and, being, if you will, the notes coming from the instrument. I mean, it seems like then that the quality of the performance is something for you that's it's an especially big factor in what you're going to gravitate to.
I guess I've never thought of it in those terms, but it's inescapably true, I guess, from every example that I've tried to provide you about why I like my movies.
Yeah.
When we get into the Oscars, I will demonstrate that it's not always true, because I really much to my surprise, liked Mary Poppins, which is a movie I expected to hate.
I like Mary Poppins as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. I mean, what can I say? You know, it was fun. You know, and I thought no one could replace Julie Andrews, but
Emily
Blunt was
fine.
brilliant.
Yeah, she did a great job.
I'm disappointed she's not up for an Oscar.
You know, somewhere online it sounded like there was some animus towards her, you know, some hostility for reasons I don't know. And you as a critic, you may have some idea about why the Academy would be against Emily Blunt.
I mean, maybe because they, you know, it's a mainstream, you know, Disney movie,
maybe.
And they, you know, they want to, you know, choose something that seems outwardly more prestigious, because I do think even as the Academy's changed, they definitely still look down their noses a bit at, you know, kind of mass entertainment, for lack of a better two words, but
yeah,
I don't know. I definitely choose favorites. I think along some of the criteria you mentioned. I mean, performance is everything. I mean, I don't think I've ever, you know, chosen a favorite movie of the year that wasn't led by a truly compelling actor I couldn't take my eyes off of.
Yeah, at the top of their game.
Yes,
really at the top of their game.
Yeah. I think, you know, also, I mean, you know, so much, you know, personal stuff comes into this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and, you know, often, you know, I think a lot of critics sort of frame themselves as these, you know, very objective, you know, creatures who, like, you know, pick a favorite, you know, or a best of the year, almost as if it's a science project. But it's really not that. Like, you know, for instance, I'm a really, really passionate fan of Roma. You know, I think Roma is a movie for the ages, and I considered putting that in my number one slot. But then I thought, you know, as much as I admire Alfonso Cuarón and what he achieved with that movie, you know, I was like, well, if I'm really honest with myself, you know, even though First Man is a less perfect film, I'm drawn to that movie more, you know, maybe partly because of, you know, the things I'm interested in. You know, I've been interested in NASA since I was a little kid, you know, with a toy space shuttle in my room, you know, and I think there are all these factors that come into play. So I think it's trying certainly to pick, certainly being honest about like what you're drawn to, and not feeling like, oh, I have to, you know, pick this because, you know, it's, you know, the most impressive achievement of the year. But also, you know, certainly you want to choose a movie that's complex and, you know, is entertaining and challenging and really delivers. And I try to find something that, you know, encompasses, you know, all those things. I try to always pick something that's from the heart, you know, that, you know, also appeals to the head as well. But it's a balancing act, and, you know, some years I do look back and, you know, think, oh, maybe I would choose something different. You know, 2011, that year was a year that was a very close call for me. I had 5 different movies, and all of them, you know, any of the 5 in your mind on a given day would have been the number one choice? Sure, yeah.
Wow.
I ultimately picked Drive as my number one, but looking back, it's like, I don't know, if I thought about that again, you know, maybe I would, you know, choose The Tree of Life or Shame, or even The Adjustment Bureau, which is, you know, perhaps a less heady film, those choices. But that's a movie that I get so much pleasure out of that movie. I watch it almost every year. You know?
Wow.
So I mean, it's a tricky thing, and I think it's something, you know. It's a constant quest developing the perfect criteria, because the more movies you see, the older you get, those things change. It's a journey like anything else in film.
Well, my big deficit this year is that I haven't seen Roma. I mean, I am embarrassed by that. I know
envy
he's
you,
a
actually, because you get to see it for the first time,
Yeah, but he directed Gravity, right? That's the reason that man was given the option, right, of doing any movie he wanted. He could do an indie, or he could have done a big studio production. Is the way I understood it. But he chose to go for an indie and then shoot it in black and white. And that's courageous in itself. And man, it makes you wonder if he did that simply because of a deep self-confidence, or if he in some other way just wanted to prove himself, if he did it for more superficial reasons.
Well, it's
having seen it, you might know.
Yeah, I mean, we have to wrap up in a sec. We're going to record our Oscar talk right after this.
Right.
But after we take a break, of course, because we're all about breaks here.
Yep.
Keep the mind fresh.
More coffee.
Yes.
Waitress, more coffee.
But the thing that strikes me about Cuarón is that he is a Mexican filmmaker who has spent a lot of time in Hollywood. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Children of Men, Gravity. These are all Hollywood movies. They're all in kind of familiar Hollywood genres. And yet he always comes home eventually. When he made Y Tu Mama Tambien, which I just saw for the first time a couple of months ago. And I think
my God, really? I own that movie.
Nice.
I mean, I actually bought that one. That's a beautiful movie.
It is a beautiful movie. Like, he had actually been in Hollywood for a while when he made that movie. And so he came home to do that. Then he does, his three Hollywood, kind of sci-fi and fantasy films. But then, Roma is him coming home again. He always comes back to his roots. I think he wants to, work with actors from all over the world. He wants to work in all kinds of different genres because he's a very versatile guy. But I think he never wants to lose touch with his roots. And as for the black and white, it reminded me of a bit of Cold War, which is another black and white film where a director is kind of exploring their personal history a bit. And I think, black and white, part of the deal is that, it instantly has a kind of nostalgic feel. We associate it with the past. But then also, the things that happen in Roma, and there's a particularly disturbing scene at the end where you'll know what I'm talking about if you see it. Some of the stuff in that movie would have been too overwhelming in color. I think some of the stuff people would have been fleeing from either the theaters or their Netflix account because it would have been so disturbing to see it, kind of in fully fledged. Technicolor, as it were.
With all the special effects and realism available today.
Yeah, I think black and white kind of offers
a distance.
The distance, yeah. And I think you need that if you're gonna deal with the kinds of things he's dealing with, because certainly you want to affect people, you want to even unnerve them, but you don't want to completely push them away. And I think that's part of why Schindler's List was shot in black and white. I think that movie's extraordinarily disturbing. I think in color it would have been almost unpalatable, and it needed to be palatable for Spielberg to communicate what he was saying to a mass audience.
He had to touch enough people.
He did, yeah. We should wrap up here.
Right.
If you like this podcast, which we're recording at Rose City Coffee Co. Brooklyn Park, by the way, please put thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at T.H.O Movie Reviews. And please check out all the great reviews and content we have at THOMovieReviews.wordpress.com. Once again, I'm Bennett Campbell Ferguson, here with Jim Newman. And from all of us at T.H.O Movie Reviews, happy movie watching.